The air, water, earth, and sun awes us. The four awesome forces of nature can provide 1,000 times more energy than we need. You are also awesome. You and me and all Earthkind are the fifth element. We are literally changing the world. Technology is now harnessing nature's awesome power for electricity, heat, and transportation. And the best news is that the clean energy transition can save us money and create a more prosperous, just, beautiful, and sustainable civilization today. Welcome to the Awesome Earthkind Podcast.
Why, thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure. If you would, please let folks know who you are, where do you live, what kind of work do you do?
Well, I am the Reverend Dr. Leonisa Ardizzone. I live in the People's Republic of Rosendale in Ulster County, New York. And I am a educator, minister, musician. I have a number of slashes in my work titles there. So
outstanding. And so if you would, we like to start if you have a favorite quote that helps people, shapes people's minds and just sort of orients them to things that are different and worth thinking about.
Oh, good. Well, so I'm going to share two because if that's okay, Ron.
Sure.
Because one is something I came up with that frames all the climate faith work I do. And then there's a quote that I think is really important. So the one I say that's like on a little meme that I use to promote my specific work is science provides us with the evidence. Our faith compels us to act.
Ooh, very nice.
Right. So that's what I think about. And that was informed, though, by this wonderful quote from Gus Speth, who's the environmental lawyer and co-founder of the NRDC, the Natural Resource Defense Council. And he says, I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that.
Wow.
Isn't that heavy?
Very intense. What a concept during Earth Month when the world is facing a whole range of crises on the climate. And boy, all right, Reverend Doctor, if you would be so kind. So why are you focused on climate change?
Yeah, it's a funny question because shouldn't everyone be focused on climate change? It's existential. To not focus on it would make me feel like I shouldn't get out of bed in the morning, right? So I have been an environmental ed and science educator for years, and it just seems to me it's like the most pressing issue because it encompasses everything: environmental justice, issues of structural violence, systemic racism, poverty. It's all tied in. And for me, climate change is the way we need to be thinking, right? It's futures oriented. If we're not thinking about climate change, then we are not thinking about a future or a future that is just for all people.
Well, I think it goes even beyond that, Reverend Doctor, which is that if we don't think about it and solve this issue and the extreme weather events continue, we're facing the ultimate collapse of all civilization.
That's why I said extinction too, or existential, because it is. It's totally existential. But, I don't know if humans, lots of folks don't care like that. They say, oh, well, or someone else will take care of it. And we're at the point where no one else will take care of it. We have to take care of it. We have to address it right now, right?
Yes, indeed. And so what kind of activities are you involved with?
Well, let's see. So over the years, I've been mostly focusing on it in the educational world. I was a science educator and then an informal science educator. So I have created curricula for the city of New York, for kids I teach, for in a little book I wrote about doing science with children, and there's climate change under awareness in there for very little kids. You got to adjust it accordingly. I do a fair amount of organizing at the congregation I serve, also locally, and I do a lot of work, mostly teaching. I'm teach at Vassar, and I am teaching a course about climate change that brings science, spirituality, and climate change into dialogue together. And my latest effort and real interest is engaging clergy. I don't even like using the word clergy, but it's all either spiritual or religious people, ordained or not ordained, but just folks who have a religious orientation, to really understand the science, the data, the reality of climate change, and then how clergy or religious educators or lay leaders can bring this awareness into their congregations or wherever they're serving and working, to just make that connection that this is a pressing issue, and as faith leaders, we have a responsibility to address it all the time, I would say.
Fascinating. So I just had an interesting conversation today with an individual who's extremely wealthy, extremely bright, cares about the environment, but still does not believe that people, the 7 billion of us on this planet, are actually changing the weather. What do you say about that?
Well, I say we have data that disproves that notion, right? So I started out as a scientist long before I became an educator. I was a biologist, and then I ran an engineering non-for-profit, and then I like data. It doesn't tell us everything, but it's a great starting point. And I actually share a presentation when I teach and when I work with clergy that shows like it graphically, because then you can't mess it up, right? Graphs showing that human impact is the greatest, is the impact that we're talking about here. If we're looking at greenhouse gas emissions and you control for all the other things, solar flares, volcanoes, all, anything people want to say it is, when you control for all of that and you actually plot it along the lines of greenhouse gas emissions, you see that it is in fact a human created tragedy. I was going to say tragedy. I'm going to stick with tragedy. That feels like the right word. Yeah. So there's tons of scientific data to prove that. So.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I also have an engineering background and accounting and management background, and I look at the data, and to me it's very, very clear that there's 7 billion of us.
Right.
We've saturated the environment with our
Right.
CO2 emissions and our greenhouse gas emissions, and we are now a force of nature. We are comparable to the other 4 forces, and just the fact that there's that many of us that are spewing out all these greenhouse gases that are dramatically increasing the amount of greenhouse gases more than have been around for millions of years. So we could deny it or not, but as an engineering partner, colleague said on one of the shows that we had, really, he's actually a conservative from his political perspective. So opposite side of politics of many of the people in the environmental movement. But he comes to the conclusion that, look, he's an engineer. It's not a matter of belief. You can't talk about the belief of climate change. It's like you can't talk about the belief that there's gravity or that physics work or anything else.
Right.
It's beyond belief. It's a scientific proven reality that we're impacting, and we can either adjust and take that or not. But ultimately,
but I'm glad you brought that, the whole thing about belief or not, right? Like, I feel like the United States is so far behind. We're still debating believing in it or not. And I could say this as a person who worked in science education for 30 years. In some ways, it's a failure of the education system. And I would say in particular science education, that we did not help young people, generations of young people, like understand that data has a foundation, and it can be interpreted, but if it's done well, then we have to listen to it and we can examine it and analyze it. But when you have consistent amounts of data or graphs showing you something, you don't get to say, nah, I don't believe it, right? It's the same as saying, the reason I walk instead of floating, nah, like your point of gravity or germ theory. Yeah, it's still a theory. We all get it. Germs exist, right? So.
Yeah, to me, I've said it a couple of different times, but I'll say it again. You don't have to believe in science. Just get rid of your cell phone, get rid of your computer, get rid of your car, get rid of your buildings, get rid of everything that is based on science that works, because you just don't believe it, so
Believe it.
go in the woods and just go live
Right.
in the woods, because
Right.
there's no such thing. You don't have to believe in science. Just get rid of all of it then. So
Exactly.
anyway, that's my
Yeah.
little rant.
That's a good rant, Ron.
All right. So in the ecumenical community, what are
Yeah.
the forces that you see driving climate change activism, and what are the biggest trends that you're seeing?
So, it's a mixed bag because some communities are more receptive to the concept and are doing more. I could say, as a Unitarian Universalist, we're right on it. We have our own the UU Ministry for Earth that does workshops and trainings and organizing. There are wonderful interfaith movements like Green Faith I'm now getting more involved with, and they're trying to globally get people of faith more involved to be active voices for an awareness of climate change and its impacts around the world. There's more. I would say that there's more dialogue happening. It still feels very slow to me, though. I gotta say, like that. There's not always a conversations in interfaith circles, and maybe that's because I'm looking at the wrong circles. But I am trying to be part of that movement. But there. I guess the trend, a lot of it is an awareness of, I would say it's landing in the environmental justice realm. Like the interfaith and ecumenical folks are fully aware that what we see happening among our most disenfranchised communities, the global south, places that are the most vulnerable, they're feeling the effects of climate change more acutely, more quickly, more presently. And I feel ecumenical movements are saying, oh, yeah, we have to pay attention to this, right? So I'm not sure how much is done, though, like in the pulpit, but I do know on the ground there are ecumenical groups stepping up to say, we have to do something about this. But I also
So
think for every group that is doing something, there's others who dismiss science or dismiss climate change because it doesn't fit in with their ethos. So, yeah.
interesting. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was blown away a couple of years ago when the Pope came out for the Catholic Church, which is
Yep.
what, 1 billion people across the planet,
Mm-hmm.
one of, if not the largest religious establishment in existence,
Mm-hmm.
and said this is an issue and we
Yeah.
need to deal with it.
Yeah.
And as I said, I have a guy who basically says that his feeling is that if you believe in the right to life, then man, get with it, because the right to
Right.
live is what we're facing with climate change, and we're
Absolutely.
going to wipe ourselves out.
Yeah.
And gosh, so there
Yeah.
you have, sort of different extremes, but still coming to the same conclusion. So where do you see the opposition? I mean, why is there opposition? Where is it coming from?
Well, so that's a great question because I think a lot of it comes down to being present oriented versus future oriented. So there are some religious beliefs that say that our present state, where we are now, is not the end, right? We're just here until we go to, call it what you will, heaven or some great hereafter that's eternally blissful and perfect, or this, that, and the other. And for some folks, it takes the impetus for caring for the here and now out of the equation, right? Like if I'm going to go to paradise or some way, because after I die and I go to heaven, then the hereafter is what matters. But I think that's a small percentage. But that's where I think about where the resistance comes from. Is there this sense that all questions will be answered later? And I think many of us, religious and other, believe quite strongly that no, right here and now, and human suffering, and not just human suffering, plant, all species suffering now is what matters most, right? Like we have to be paying attention to the here and now and future in the sense of future generations, right? So it's a different way of thinking. And I do think that unfortunately, there's a fair amount of scripture that talks about how humans should relate to life on the planet. And there's a lot of dominion and domination language in there. But I see a lot of conversations happening where that's getting reinterpreted and reminded that we are stewards of the earth. We're not meant to just destroy it, right? That extraction isn't the only way to think of the earth as a resource to be used, right? It's there's going to be finite if we keep treating it that way. So we have to. Yeah. So my sense is the folks who are really grounded in the here and now and future generations, not in the hereafter, can help make that shift.
But even in the here and now, I mean, clean energy has gotten to the point where it's more economical, it's healthier, it's safer. I
Hmm.
mean, maybe it's just that people don't recognize it yet, but I mean, solar is the cheapest source of electricity on the planet right now. The
I know.
bigger, the more you do, the cheaper it
Right.
gets. You know,
Right.
and the same with solar and wind are the
Hmm.
predominant form of new generation all across the globe because it's the least expensive option.
Right.
And the same is becoming true now of electric vehicles, where it's half the price to drive fuel wise, and there's
Yeah.
no oil changes in transmission fluid. So the maintenance is less, and the cost up front is both coming down and it's competitive with the incentives that are out there.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
same is true with clean heating solutions with both air and ground source heat pumps.
Hmm.
So in the here and now, I mean, there's still this hesitancy to make change,
Yeah.
and so I'm just trying to understand from an ecumenical perspective,
Yeah.
if you believe in anything,
Yeah.
and you want a better life for your kids, which I think we all do,
Right.
then what's
Right.
stopping us?
Yeah. No, that's a great it's a fundamental question. And I thought, it's funny when you were saying that. When I was teaching in 1996, I wrote a curriculum on alternative energy sources. And I'm like amazed that it's still something that kids and people and grown-ups don't understand, and that they don't understand the notion of renewable versus non-renewable. Like, how do we still, and I wonder too if so for me, there's a spiritual question, and I don't know if it's about um addiction, and not in the sense of like that we're addicted to what we know, we're addicted to our conveniences, we're addicted to overuse, we're also maybe addicted to the notion of who we, I hate to put it this way, but who we listen to and who tells us it's right, what's right or not. Or so I guess, how do I put it this way? I think it's a fundamental spiritual question of consumption and satisfaction with what we have, how we live. And that's where my, concern of capitalism comes in this whole thing, because I think we're so part of this traumatic capitalist system that even to view something that is more financially viable, better for the planet. I think it's really hard for people to break out of it because they think it's going to require them to make sacrifices because they maybe don't know enough, right? And then I think that also comes down to just individual choices people make. Like, I'm not going to give this thing up that I like to do because it's about me and it's what I like, right? There's still a selfishness. It goes to the quote that we just read, right? There's still a um, selfishness, a greed, and apathy that to me seems like a fundamentally spiritual problem. And if we're not aware of it on some more spiritual, deeper heart level, then I don't know what we do. Does that make
Interesting.
sense? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's. I mean, not to debate capitalism or not, but
Right.
the gentleman that I'm speaking about before has a book called Fusion Capitalism because he views the clean energy revolution as the greatest economic opportunity of the
Yeah.
21st century, of the greatest opportunity ever to face humanity. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that that little ball of up there in the sky has
Right.
more energy than 1,000 times more energy than humanity needs is just his perspective. Is like we're out of our minds. It's
Right.
a tremendous capitalist opportunity. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's capitalism. I don't know quite what it is, but
Yeah.
it's something
But
that I think we need to deal with,
absolutely. And when I was jotting thoughts down, I think the green jobs and green training movement makes total sense. I mean, I was working at an organization that was starting those things 20 plus years ago, more than that, like in the Bronx, and trying to say, let's put, let's help young people find work in the green sector, even though it was like an emergent sector. And like now there are more and more programs. There's this one at Ulster, SUNY Ulster, and other things. So I'm with you. I mean, I, I am definitely anti-capitalist there. I'm just going to say it and move it on. But I don't disagree that there are other ways that people could have opportunities and jobs and things that actually don't make you choose between feeding my family and doing something good, right? Like, people can have fulfilling and positive work in the world in the green in the green sector, green technology sector, right? And then it's not a trade-off, really, right?
And actually, I mean, the reality is that there are 3.4 million Americans working in the clean energy sector today, and that is triple the amount in the fossil fuel industry. So when
Look
you
at
take a
that.
look at jobs and economic opportunity, the
Wow.
reality is there's more opportunity in clean energy today, even without all
Absolutely.
the transformations that we need to have.
Yeah.
So it's not a trade-off, and yet
No.
maybe people don't still realize it, I guess, you
Yeah,
know?
well, I think it's not realizing it, and I maybe you know better than I do, but I think it also requires a training, right? Like it's all so it's not just a shift in mindset, but it's also helping people learn new positions and So I don't know enough about that to speak about that, but I know that there are lots of places that are trying to. Um, I keep thinking of like something I read about West Virginia, right, where coal country, the generational coal country, not like a job I did once, but a job my father did, my grandfather, my great grandfather, right? Like to shift that mindset, or how do we make sure we have programs, infrastructure to say, okay, let's change all of that into learning how to then do, be a photovoltaic installer, right? Or, things like that. So I didn't know 3.4 million people were already doing that. I think it's fantastic. And I think it is a serious growth industry and one that's, worthy of support. So where's our disconnect, I guess, is what I,
Yeah, I mean that's
right?
really what I'm wondering, and in particular,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm also wondering is how does the faith community, which is where a lot of people based, as you're saying, their kind of motivation about what they do and how they live their lives, how can that become more focused, involved, engaged, and activating, so that just I mean we got the Pope
Mm-hmm.
saying it, right? So
Right.
every religious, I believe, just about every religion
Yeah.
from across the board believes
Mm-hmm.
in taking care, being stewards of the earth, and taking
Yeah.
care of ourselves and our families and future generations. So how is it that what is it that we can do that can the ecumenical community can do that can really make a difference? What do you see? What do you think is going to happen?
Well,
How
what
can
I
you make
think
it
is
happen?
key. So I read this research not recently, a while ago, but again, because I'm using it in a class. Pew Charitable Trust does all this
Hmm.
wonderful research on religious practices and this and that, and this research was pointing out how people listen to their ministers. Right? Like, I mean, it's a thing that I'm a minister. I wonder if people listen to me, but I don't know. But there's this research that shows that level of that's a given. While numbers are declining in people who are attending organized religions, there are still people who, when you go to church, you listen to what your minister says, right? So my thinking as a result of reading that report was then every clergy member needs to use, I hate to say it that way because it sounds so crass, but to basically use their pulpit and as a way to educate and invite their followers, their listeners, their members, their congregants into a raised awareness of the urgency of addressing climate change, and because we know that, major religious leaders have written text on this. There are theologians who have taken biblical passages and said, look, this is what's being said here. There's no shortage of ways to bring that into a liturgy on any given Sunday. I think, and it's easier for me as a Unitarian Universalist minister where we draw from so many sources, right? I can bring in the environment in any way that I want. I think the challenge, or the question with my fellow clergy is, how do we make it part of the ethos of each congregation that we serve? So it's not every Sunday, but it's something we do within our congregations that helps everyone realize that this is what matters and this is where we're going to put our energy and our efforts, right? And in some ways, I think clergy can convince people. I hate to say convince because that also sounds crass, but they can bring people along in a way that maybe listening to a scientist, meh. Oh, but listening to my priest, okay, right? Maybe.
Well, that's what I think is part of the hope, right? And that's part of
Mm-hmm.
what you're all about, right? Is
Yep.
like helping to get the ecumenical community involved and
Yep.
engaged. And so, okay, so what challenges have you encountered, and what lessons have you learned, and what are you doing differently now?
That's a good question. Well, so I guess I'll think on I want to talk a little bit about the kind of the curriculum and education level, because and the outreach portion, because I've done a fair amount of workshops with people across the board. I think that sometimes it's there's a concern about time and fear of not having all the answers. Right. And I see that with teachers. I see that even with clergy. I see that across the board. Right. We think that we have to have all the answers in order to engage in these really important existential conversations, right? Climate change. And, and what I've learned, and I guess I've known this for years because my mentor sort of gave it to me straight 30 odd years ago, but like, we're never experts, right? If we embrace learning as a lifelong pursuit, right? There's always more to learn. We can always have beginner's mind. We can always seek out someone who we can have a great conversation with or whom we can learn from. So, and we can always turn everything into questions and a learning opportunity, right? Like the fundamental practice of science is asking questions and then learning stuff and then asking more questions, right? So, I think as faith leaders, we often think people come and say, I just want answers. And I get that. People do just want answers. But I wonder if we can flip the script and say, I have questions too. And here are where my answers have gotten me. And let's explore more together. That's how I was in a classroom. And I thought, well, that's maybe how I should be as a clergy member as well, right? Because I certainly don't know all the things. I love getting into conversations with people who can teach me something new. That's really fun. Like this past weekend, I spent at an intergenerational learning seminar sponsored by the United Nations, the Unitarian Universalist Office at the United Nations. And I was in conversations with 17-year-olds and 70-something-year-olds talking about food justice and sustainability and climate change. And man, if it wasn't a great time, right? Because we just were learning from each other. And I think that's a big piece. I think people want to have either answers given to them or they just don't want the answers. And I think we have to dig into the muddy, like, let's learn from each other place, right? Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, how about talking and thinking about that? Tell us one thing that you've done with clean energy and share one unique, call it tip, tool, tactic that you think people need to know but probably don't.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think I saw that, but I don't know if I took a note on that one. Well, actually, you helped me make this decision, and it was an easy one, but I wrote to you. I don't know if you remember, but we became members in a solar farm for our house because we actually did the research to put photovoltaics on our roof, but we have lots of trees, so we couldn't. So instead, we became members of a solar farm, and it was, like a phone call. It was the easiest thing in the world, and now we we will be getting our energy from the sun. Hey, what an easy concept, right? And so that one, and they're building more and more of them. I mean, just in Dutchess, you reach beyond our counties, but Ulster and Dutchess counties alone, they're just, building those solar farms. And that to me seems like a really easy answer for folks to just go. And even if you can't find a buy-in to a solar farm, you can call your energy provider and make the shift to a clean energy source. So you can either request that you can have wind or solar, right? That's another option to do. There's lots of clean energy. What do they call them again? Brokers.
Energy service companies.
Service
ESCOs.
companies, right?
There you
ESCOs.
go. So, yep.
Thank you. Yeah. So that to me seems like we can all do a version of that, right? And Mm-hmm.
Great. So that's a wonderful thing. So yeah, so if you rent an apartment or you're not going to stay in a current place or you don't have the ability to do solar on your particular home, in most parts of the country now, you can actually become part of a community solar project and have your piece of the grid come from that solar farm. And if you can't do that directly, there's other mechanisms through an energy service company where you can choose the green option and have your piece of the electricity supply come from a wind or solar farm. And you can even do that if you don't have a competitive electric supply in many parts of the country with your monopoly utility. So lots of different ways of clean electricity generation. And then there's all sorts of things that people can also do beyond solar with electricity. And that's everything from energy conservation and looking at how to improve your efficiency in your home with LED light bulbs and cleaning the filters on your HVAC system so that it doesn't work so hard. And same with your refrigerator and all sorts of other things. And we have a little tip tool on the website if you guys care to take a look on their resources. All right, so let's go to your worst clean energy moment and tell us what happened and what was the lesson you learned from that one.
Well, it's I was thinking, so before I moved up here, I lived in Manhattan for 20 or so years, and I lived in a decent sized apartment building, and we used oil to run that building, and they didn't have individual thermostats in apartments. I know, right? And I come from, my dad was a plumber and an HVAC guy, so like I know this stuff, and it was so frustrating to go to live in a building in my apartment where in the dead of winter, we were on the top floor. I'd have to open the windows. And all I kept thinking was, oh, and I would sometimes turn all the knobs off on the radiators, right? Turn everything off. And it didn't matter because they just set it to a level and then they just let it run. And then next thing you know, you're looking around and you see all these apartment windows open while the heat is on and running. And I just always felt, it was so cringy. That was the first effort that we made to, joining an ESCO. But then I'm going to sell this because this is, I think, a really important story. Then my kid and I hit on really hard times and we were put on public assistance. We got SNAP benefits for a few years and they bumped us off the ESCO because of our income issues. So I learned right then and there how unjust and stacked against even people with lower income who want to have an environmental mindset with their heating bills. They force you to go into a payment plan based on your income, and they immediately remove you from a green service provider because it was like a few pennies more. And they said no to, so they kicked us off of that. And so then once we were back on our feet and off of SNAP, we did it again. But so the two of those were, one was the cringiness of why can't we just put thermostats in apartment buildings, or can't we put something on the roof? Hello, we have how many rooftops in New York City, right? And I worked with a group who was putting green roofs on, and that was really helpful and trying to at least paint roofs different colors so that you can mitigate urban heat island effect and all those things. But yeah, every time winter would roll around and my apartment turned into a sauna, I just was horrified. But then that 1-2 punch of being when you make an effort and you hit hard times or you live in poverty, which we know many Americans unfortunately do because of the structure of society, you don't even have the option to try and live more green in some simple way.
All right. Many of us have had we call it the aha moment, that piece of creativity where all of a sudden something that we've been thinking about comes to be and you're like, I've got it. You have a particular moment like that you care to share with clean energy?
Clean energy aha moment. I think it goes back to that curriculum and the work I was doing that led into that. I was teaching at that time I was teaching at an intertribal school, the American Indian Heritage School in Seattle, Washington. I was young. I was in my early 20s or something. And was meeting all these, I was doing an environmental education curriculum that I had created and was working with. And so I was working with tribal elders. And so it's not a clean energy per se, but it was in there because we'd have these amazing conversations and I'd have these amazing learning moments of why we make the choices we make. So I think all my environmental aha moments but definitely were impacted by when you spend time with people who just look at the world in a very different way, as an inherent connection to the planet, as a member of the family, as a life giver, not as a commodity. It's really hard to then make any decision about clean energy or what you buy or where you shop or how you eat. All of those things happened for me by having those conversations with people who just opened my eyes, really.
So the aha moment was
being in dialogue with tribal elders who helped me understand that I was already a person who considered myself an environmentalist, and they just took me to a whole new level. They just helped me see it through every cell in my body instead of just as a biologist. So yeah, I guess that was it. I was looking at it sort of as a biologist, and I started to look at it as a spiritual being instead, thanks to these indigenous elders that I spend time with.
Excellent. All right. We're going to enter the Pulsar Round. This is where we ask you a series of questions and we look for your short, succinct, and mind-blowing answers.
Oh, dear.
Are you ready?
I think so.
All right, I hope so. Here we go. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Don't take it personally, even if it has your name on it.
Very excellent. Thank you very much. Personal habit that contributes to your success.
Beginner's mind. As I enter the world and look at the world, try to look at it with the mind of a child.
Outstanding. An internet resource that you'd like to share with our listeners.
I think I would encourage everyone to visit the Poor People's Campaign because it covers so many things that are important, and even greenfaith.org.
Great. A book you'd recommend to people and why?
So this was really hard for me because I have so many books that I like, and
we notice in back of you. Yes.
I know it's a little ridiculous. So I started, but then had to put down, and I'm going to return to it, and because I think Naomi Klein's "This Changes Everything."
This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. Thank you very much. If you had a magic wand and could wave it and change one thing for everybody in the world, what would it be?
The inability to feel greed.
Wait.
Yes, we could no longer be greedy. If we could wave the wand and people, so let me put it on a positive.
Yes.
We would be satisfied with who we are and what we have.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry. The inability to do greed
was that weird, dude? I don't know.
Just took me off. That was all.
Okay.
To be satisfied with who we are and what we have.
And what we have. Mm-hmm.
So to end greed, eh?
Yes, to end greed.
Okay. End greed. Great. Excellent. All right. We call this the WTF or F section, where we talk about weather time fudge and extreme weather events and your tale of having lived through the harrowing time, or weather time fun, the most fun you've ever had, if you'd like to keep it on that basis and the type of weather it was.
Yeah, well, I had two, and I was thinking, all right, so maybe I'll pick this one. My whole family, extended family, were in Rhode Island for, I want to say, a cousin graduating from college, because, Italian people, any reason to get together with large groups, you just sort of do it. And it was a hurricane, and I can't remember which hurricane it was now. This is 30 odd years ago. And we all had to evacuate and leave the coast, and my one uncle, some of us came up on his boat. And so it was this crazy story. So we had to evacuate and go somewhere, and we lost my brother. But it turns out it was fine because he had met a girl. So we're all evacuated, worrying about him. And then 2 days later, just before cell phones, he wanders in and he was having a great time. And the rest of us were worried. But we all made it a good time while we watched. And then my uncle, I think, tried to take the boat back to New York in this storm, but they survived. So I was like, why don't you just wait? Let's go inland and wait. Hurricanes are, Mother Nature wins. Mother Nature always wins. That's what I've been telling my kids since she was little. So in the end, it was an interesting experience.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. What's the one thing you're most energized about today?
Well, this conversation and the prospect of this conversation had gotten me really thinking about finally fixing my website and getting my ideas out there to do another round of these clergy workshops that I'm really interested in doing, because I had to put them on hold for a while. So I'm energized to get out there and start having more conversations with my interfaith colleagues about how we can work together to address climate change.
Outstanding. All right, grand finale. If you'd share a piece of parting advice and the best way for people to connect with you if you'd like them to.
Yeah, I would love people to connect with me. My parting advice is do what you can. I think what happens is we get trapped in the space of the things that we could do on a small level and the systemic change that has to happen, and both have to happen. So see what you're feeling. Maybe you want to make a change in how you eat or how you shop or how you live or how you heat your home or any of those things. Those are things you can do immediately. And at the same time, look around and see who you can meet or collaborate with, or what petition you can sign, or what action you can take to work towards the systemic, right? So don't always view it as like, I'm too small, what can I do? Because we can all make individual changes and we can all put pressure on the structures and the systems that exist to change them as well. And if you want to find me, I have a website, leonisaardizzone.com, and it has all manner of things on there, but there is a contact page, I believe. So feel free to reach out, which I hope to be updating it in the next couple weeks. Thanks to you, Ron, putting a fire under there. So
Outstanding. Anything that we missed that you wanted to say or mention?
You know what? The other thing I wanted to say is the other book, I realize that too, is The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz will change your life. So maybe that's the book people should read. Yeah.
Outstanding. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. I'm sure I'll think of something later. No, I think that's everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Very good.
Oh, wait. Can I just promote? Oh, no, we don't know when we're going to air this, but I'm doing an Earth Day service. I can also just tell you, you could cut this out.
Sorry, it's definitely gonna be most likely after that. So
after that, okay.
Yeah. So sorry about that. But
okay.
But have fun with your Earth Day service.
No, I thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Reverend Dr. Leonisa Ardizzone, thank you so much for your time and insights and wisdom and great work, and good luck with your next wave of ecumenical outreach on climate change and activism. I hope you get that faith community in gear.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to end it. Hold on a second. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thanks for joining us today, awesome people. At awesomeearthkind.com, you'll find tips and resources on how to reduce your energy costs and have a positive environmental impact. You can also enter our monthly sweepstakes for a high-efficiency LED light fixture. If you're interested in becoming an Earthkind Energy Consulting Partner, go to awesomeearthkind.com/earn. When you refer us to a commercial building and they decide to go clean and save green with Earthkind Energy's consulting services, your referral will save money and you will earn finder's fees worth thousands of dollars. If you're interested in starting your own clean energy consulting business, sign up to be notified of the Clean Energy Business Partner that we're launching in May. This intensive program will provide you with the tools you need to start your own clean energy consulting business in the fast-growing $7 trillion clean energy sector. Today's podcast was co-sponsored by New Energy Nexus. New Energy Nexus strives to create an abundant world with a 100% clean energy economy for 100% of the population in the shortest time possible. The future of clean energy is 100% for the 100%. Become part of the solution by going to newenergynexus.com. Remember, you are an awesome force of nature and can make a real difference. Take your next step to create the clean energy future we all want and our children need and deserve. Until next time, take care, be well, and energize!